could it be? With me, you're me. Louie T, welcome to this LouieTeeNetwork exclusive limited series, The Reign of Terror. We're on Chapter 6, 2004 season. And I want to clean up something on my end first before we get to today's episode. At the end of Chapter 5, with Steve Spurrier in his final year in Washington, I said that Daniel Snyder fired him. That is inaccurate. Steve Spurrier quit. He retired. All right, he resigned. He realized that the NFL wasn't for him. Okay. Now, would Dan have fired him anyway? I don't know. I don't think so. Not with 3 years remaining on the richest contract in NFL history. I think Dan would have liked to have seen it for at least one more year before he probably got rid of him. But that was all Spurrier's decision. And I played you his exit press conference essentially at the end of the season. He already knew. You could hear it in his voice. He already knew he was done. So I just wanted to clean that up. So Spurrier resigning kind of left this void, and it was a big one because ever since Dan Snyder came back, he had been trying to persuade Joe Gibbs. The first thing he tried to do was persuade Gibbs to come back and coach this team after they fired Norv Turner. Gibbs said no. After they got rid of Marty Schottenheimer, Gibbs said no. So he went back to the well again, all right? And this time he was able to convince Joe that this was the right time. And I've always told you guys this, if nothing else about Dan Snyder, if there are no other redeeming qualities, the one thing he is very good at is selling you on something. Whether that something is coming to Washington, and he's done it multiple times where we didn't think he was capable, whether it's Shanahan, Gibbs, Schottenheimer, he sold coaches, Ron Rivera, right? He sold coaches this dream of what being the head coach of the Washington Redskins would be, and how much you could change this and that, and you can have control over this and that. And we ultimately know that that doesn't always play itself out. But with Joe Gibbs in particular, that was the one time he was going to relinquish control, right? Like, Joe Gibbs is the greatest head coach in this franchise's history. And we were shocked. And again, we were just starting to turn. If you can go back in the machine, in the time machine, we were just starting to turn on Daniel Snyder, okay? This is your third coach in 5 years. This ship is sinking. We suck. We haven't done anything of note since you got here. 99 is the best season we've had. Every year thereafter, we've gotten progressively worse. This roster is terrible. And it's you. You're the common denominator. Coaches have come and gone. Players have come and gone. You're still here, and it's getting worse. So we were starting to turn on Snyder, and then he goes and does this. And when I tell you, we all looked at each other as Redskins fans in 04 when this was announced back in January. We said, oh my God, the greatest coach in franchise history, Joe Jackson Gibbs, is back and he's coming to save us. We're going to the Super Bowl. And I can't begin to explain the level of euphoria that came over Redskins fans at that time. I mean, it was the most dramatic scene. We did not see this coming. And Joe showed up with that $1 million smile, and he talked about his reverence for the organization and how he feels like this is the right time. You know, he loves what Dan Snyder has built, and together they're going to turn this thing back around. And there was this brief period in the Snyder era, this brief period in time where we thought, here we go. All right. Now, there'll be one more of these periods. You guys know exactly what I'm talking about, but this was the one for me. Because 2012 felt like it was on uneven ground. It was on shaky ground, okay? Anything with Joe Gibbs attached to it is on a solid foundation, a rock solid foundation. So as far as I was concerned, if we get the right pieces in here, we're going to win. And we're going to win big. And that's exactly what 04 was all about. Joe came in and so much had changed since Joe Gibbs last donned the burgundy and gold. And remember, his last season was 1992. It's 2004. When he left the NFL, there were 6 divisions. There's now 8 divisions, okay? When he left the NFL, there were 28 teams, I believe. There are now 32 teams in the NFL. When he left the NFL, there was no free agency. Of course, there's free agency. When he left the NFL, if I'm not mistaken, there were no challenges and there were no 2-point conversions. Both of those things were instituted since his departure. So the game had totally changed, okay? But that didn't stop Joe from bringing the old band back together. He brought in Don Bro, who was with him in his first stint in Washington as one of his assistant coaches. He brought in Joe Bugs, as he was affectionately known as the master of the hogs, right? And, you know, he brought Rennie Simmons with him. Like, he brought the whole group back together. You know, it's like this old superhero who has all these people that he used to kick it with that used to help him save the day. And they all went and start living their lives. And then now they need this superhero to come back. And what do? You go and you get your crew, right? He went and got his crew. And I'm like, oh, shit, here we go. Oh, Gibbs 2.0. It's on and popping. And he goes out and he goes and gets Sean Springs, Cornelius Griffin, Philip Daniels, and Marcus Washington. And that was the core of what would become that run with Joe. Defensively, those guys came in and they were leaders. They produced at a high level, and it was exactly what we needed, this infusion of talent. We lacked it, all right? Now, again, we've talked about Dan wasting money, wasting draft picks. Well, we still didn't have any draft picks, really. But we did have a first rounder, right? First thing Joe comes in and does is he trades away our second round pick along with Champ Bailey for Clinton Portis. Now, the story goes, and I don't know how much of this is true. I believe that Champ Bailey had seen enough. Ever since he got here in 99, all he knew was change. Got here in 99, and we won in his rookie season with Norv. And then the next year Dan comes, or that same year Dan comes in, but the next year he really starts to blow shit up. Brings in all the old geezers, you know, Bruce Smith. We've already gone over all of that. You know, Mark Carrier and Jeff George and all of those guys, Deion Sanders, Bruce Smith, all of them. And it doesn't work, obviously. And so you get the change to Marty, and you could see Marty turning this thing around, and they get rid of him. You bring in Spurrier. That's a disaster. And Champ's like, you know what? I had enough. You know, let me go. Let me be free. And one of Joe's things was, and I remember Chris Cooley always saying this on the radio, like, if you didn't want to be there, Joe was going to help you get out. Like, he didn't want to hold anyone hostage. He wanted guys that were going to buy in, that wanted to be a part of the program. And if you didn't believe in what they were selling, then you can get out. And if you wanted out, he was going to help you get out. So Champ wanted out. And Joe Gibbs, as you know, always featured a dominant run game. We did not have a running back the caliber of, say, a John Riggins, who, you know, was really the hammer for Joe for many of those years. And so he wanted to go get himself an established back. Clinton Portis was coming off a back-to-back 1,500-yard rushing seasons in Denver, wanted a big contract. Broncos weren't looking to pay him in that regard because guess what? The Shanahans are like, look, we can make anybody a 1,000-yard back. And they've proven that throughout the course of their careers. You know, when Clinton got shipped off, it was Olandis, Gary, and all of these different guys that rush, Tatum Bell, all these guys rushed for over 1,000 yards. So they weren't going to pay Clinton Portis this outrageous amount of money. So they shipped him off to Washington. And I thought we got fleeced in the deal because we gave up the all-pro, future Hall of Fame cornerback. And we could all see it back in 2004. It's not like we didn't know what Champ Bailey was going to turn into. We already saw it in Washington. You knew what he was about. And you traded him and a second-round pick for Clinton Portis. That's robbery. Like, they stole from us. But in the moment, no one really batted an eye, even though we were, you know, as fans, we were a little, you know, perturbed by the whole situation. But Joe was here. We didn't give a shit, right? So Joe went and got his running back. You know, we were a little salty about Champ. I know I was. And I was definitely not happy about adding a second-round pick in the deal. If anything, Denver should have been adding a second-round pick. But so you gave away another pick. That's the shit that we were doing in those days. And you only had like 4 or 5 picks in the draft. Again, coming off a year where you only had like 3 or 4 draft picks, right? The year prior. So, of course, Clinton gets here, and his first order of business is to help with the draft because Washington is deciding between 2 Miami University players. In Joe's offense, you need a tight end. You need a guy you can trust as a blocker, as a pass catcher, someone that can be that H-back, you know. So there's a lot going on here at work. And so they're thinking about taking Kellen Winslow Jr., right? And, you know, Clinton's like, yo, I went to school with both of these dudes. He said, if you're thinking about taking a Miami player at 5, you should take Sean Taylor. And Joe's like, but we need a tight end. Then Clinton said, well, put him at tight end then. He said, we need offense. If you need offense, draft Sean Taylor. If you need defense, draft Sean Taylor. He'll get you the ball back, right? So he convinced Joe and company that the right man for the job was Sean Taylor. And boy, that turned out to be a fruitful decision for the staff or what. So they get Sean Taylor in the first round. They double back, get Chris Cooley in the third round. Look, we didn't have a ton of picks, but boy, did we make the best of those first 2 selections in the 2004 draft. Those guys turned out to be huge for us moving forward. Even in Sean's brief stint here, he was massive. The impact that he had was massive. And then Cooley ended up being a lifetime Redskin and one of the best of the Snyder era. So you add in those draft picks, the trade for Portis, and those free agent acquisitions, right, that I already talked about, Springs, Griffin, Daniels, and Marcus Washington, who I feel like after London Fletcher, probably one of the best free agent acquisitions made during the Dan Snyder era. Now, we've made some really good acquisitions. Santana Moss was a trade. He was not a free agent acquisition. I'm talking about just signing a guy that's available in free agency. Fletcher was huge. I think he's number 1. I think Marcus Washington might be too. But there were so many guys that we've brought in here. To sit out and make a list would be pretty interesting, to say the least. But that's the core group right there that I just named, right? So you go into 04, into the preseason, and the next thing you look at is, hey, we still don't really have a quarterback. So he goes out and gets Brunell, does Joe Gibbs, right? Somebody that can run his offense, a veteran that he can trust, because he doesn't trust Patrick Ramsey, all right? And Tim Hasselbeck, who played the remainder of the 03 season, he stinks. So you really don't want him out there either. So Brunell comes in, and he was not the same Brunell from Jacksonville, obviously. He is much older at this point of his career, but he could still be exactly what we needed him to be. But we'll get to that in a second. Let's get to the Hall of Fame game, because we play in the very first preseason game that year. The Denver Broncos, John Elway's being inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So the Broncos are the team hosting the Hall of Fame game. We just happen to be the opponent that they threw against them. And Sean Taylor is just ridiculous. He has a pick 6 in the game. And right away, you already see what this kid is going to be. You're like, damn, we got us a stud, right? So, and remember, this is 04 we're talking about. This isn't 2014 where we're obsessing over every single draft pick. We're doing our own homework. And if you weren't watching college football, this was before YouTube and all of that. Like, you weren't on the computer obsessed. You weren't on your mobile device obsessing over these picks like we do today. Like, we didn't know what Sean Taylor was going to be, right? We didn't find out until he got here. So, this was amazing, right? you get into the regular season opener, and this whole groundswell for Joe coming back came to this crescendo. And this is the days of FedEx Field holding 90,000. Like when we were the biggest stadium in the NFL at the time, before they had to put covers over the top row of seats because nobody's coming, and before they had to downsize it a bit, this thing held 90,000 strong, and they packed that bitch to the rafters for that first game back with Joe against the damn Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'll never forget it. And Clint Portis' first game, his first damn carry as a Washington Redskin. We run that old classic counter trey. You guys know what I'm talking about. You get that pulling guard, you get that center, they kick that bitch out on the other side. Clinton takes that first carry, cuts that bitch back where the two pullers came from. There's nobody. The Bucks overplayed the pull side. He cuts it back, zooms up that seam, gets to the second level, and hauls ass, gets in the end zone, 64 yards, first carry. We lose our shit. All right. We win the game 16-10. We get a hell of a defensive stop at the end. I remember it was crazy. I think the Bucks had like back-to-back false starts. Matt Bowen has a sack, and then they end up not being able to get it in. It was like 3rd and 38 or some shit like that, right? And we get the stop we needed. And let me just say this. So many of you romanticize about the 05 defense, right? Let me tell you, the 04 defense is the best defense that this team has had in the Snyder era, not the 05 defense. So many people romanticize about 05. 04's defense was way better. Way better. It was a shame that we just sucked on offense as bad as we did in that first year with Gibbs. Because we had Phillip Daniels, Ronaldo Wynn, Joe Salavea, Cornelius Griffin, like Demetric Evans. Like, we were stacked on that D-line with guys that could just continue to come in rotationally, like Chris Clemens as a rotational, situational pass rusher. The linebackers were just loaded. Antonio Pierce came out of nowhere and established himself as a big-time playmaker at middle linebacker. You still had LeVar Arrington, but this was the beginning of the end of him in Washington. But you still had LeVar. You brought in Marcus Washington, who was just this dynamo. He went to the Pro Bowl in that first year. Sean Springs had 5 picks in that first year in Washington. He was an all-pro. Like, that defense in 04, are you kidding me? This secondary, listen to this secondary. You had Walt Harris, Fred Smoot, Sean Springs, Ryan Clark, and you had Sean Taylor. That is as complete a secondary as I've seen in Washington ever. And you could go back to the 99 season or the 2000 season with Bailey, Green, and Smoot, if you want, or what was it, Bailey, Green, and Sanders. They still didn't have a safety play that the 04 defense had with Ryan Clark and Sean Taylor, a rookie Sean Taylor. Are you kidding me? That defense was loaded, and we were shutting teams down. We just could not score. That defense would be worn out because the offense was so trash. But I digress. Let's get back to week 1. So that defense was on full display in the first game. We shut down the Buccaneers. We win the game 16-10. And I'm thinking, here we go. Here we go, Birdman. Hand rub. Here we go. The next week, we lose to the Giants, and that was rookie Eli Manning, so that was really disappointing because they ended up stinking that first year with Eli under center. But it didn't matter. We came home. Monday Night Football, Dallas Cowboys, Week 3, Parcells against Gibbs, Tuna versus Gibbs, classic matchup. If you go back to Gibbs 1.0, when Parcells was a member of the Giants as their head coach, these two met and did battle so often. So this was like reliving those battles all over again. And that Monday night game was so much fun, except we didn't win. And that's the part that sucked. So, you know, Brunell was just awful, man. Godly. So what happened, I think, to Brunell is he got an injury very early in the season. And unfortunately, he was already old. And one of the things Mark Brunell needed was his mobility. And that injury really kind of hampered him. And he was just awful in 04. My goodness, he was bad. And so, but Joe was loyal. And so we stuck it out. And we had opportunities in that Cowboys game. And one of the things that, you know, we gave Joe a pass on a lot of times, Joe made a lot of mistakes, man. And we cut Joe a lot of breaks because he was Joe. Like, we don't question Joe. If Joe made a mistake, you say, damn, Joe, we'll get him next time, right? So in this game, the Cowboys throw they use a trick play. I remember this guy. Oh my God, we always got hit with some bullshit. So they throw a toss. So I think it was Vinny Testaverde, who was the quarterback for the Cowboys that year. And he throws a pitch to like Richie Anderson. And I didn't know, a lot of times you don't know what hand guys throw with until they actually throw the football. Most running backs carry the ball in their right hand, so you just naturally assume they're right-handed. Like Clinton Portis throws the ball left-handed, right? I think he throws it left-handed, if I'm not mistaken. And so we've done trick passes with Clinton Portis before. He might be right-handed. I might be tripping. But they throw a toss to Richie Anderson to their left, and Richie Anderson, you know, cocks back and throws that bitch to Terry Glenn for a touchdown and catches napping. And it was a hell of a play. And it put the Cowboys up 21-10, and we had so many chances. We had an opportunity. We got all the way down to the 1st and goal from the 1-yard line, and we couldn't get in, right? Like, you're kidding me. And so we had to settle for a field goal, and, you know, ultimately we lose the game by 3 points. That you score a touchdown there, who knows, you might win the game anyway, or it would have probably been tied. We probably wouldn't have gone for 2 when we did down 21-10. But anyway, you get to 21-10. Ramsey, Brunell gets us into the end zone. It's really more Clinton Portis, but it was Rod Gardner. Rod Gardner had a big game. Brunell was finding Rod Gardner all over the place. Actually, this particular play, Brunell made a hell of a play to get it to Rod Gardner. So it's 21-16 after a touchdown to Gardner. You get the 2-point conversion, which was a hell of a play by Brunell to avoid a rusher, post up, hit Gardner in the end zone, cuts it to 3. We get the ball back down 3, and Brunell throws, and it's crazy because it just gave me, it was like almost foreshadowing what would happen the very next year in the Monday Night Miracle. But Brunell cocks back with like 9 seconds to go and unleashes about a 50-yard pass. Gardner leaps up, snatches it from the Cowboys defender, and we don't have any timeouts. Why? Because Joe challenged the trick play from Terry, the pass from Richie Anderson to Terry Glenn, and it was a catch, and that was our last timeout. And in that season, what you will find, if you remember, we wasted a lot of timeouts getting in and out of the huddle, getting play calls in. We were always confused. We wasted timeouts constantly. That was the year, as a fan, I remember very vividly saying, timeouts in the second half of games are so crucial. And it was from that point forward that I really, truly began to value second half timeouts. It wasn't until that 04 season where we wasted so many second half timeouts and needed them at the end of ball games and simply did not have them, where I started to, really say to myself, hey, man, you got to, I don't give a shit what you do with the first half timeouts. Those second half timeouts, do not waste them. So we didn't have any timeouts. If we would have had one, we were already in field goal range with that Rod Gardner catch. But unfortunately, time ran out. We lost the game 21-18. It was an entertaining game, but now we're 1-2. We would proceed to lose the next 2 games. After starting 1-0, we're now 1-4. Then you get to the Week 6 game against Chicago, and this is, I call this the Sean Taylor coming out party, right? This was the game where I felt like Sean Taylor announced to the rest of the league, we already knew what we had, right? We watched him in the preseason. Early in the season, this guy's a battering ram. He hits anything that moves. We called him Meast, half man, half beast. And the Bears game was his coming out party. We go to Chicago. The Bears suck. All right, their starting quarterback, Rex Grossman, is out. So they got this journeyman quarterback in there. I forgot his name. I think it's Quinn, right? Something Quinn. And we proceed to go into Chicago. And I remember Portis was really upset the week before because he didn't get enough carries in the loss. I think it was to Baltimore. And so, and he hadn't had a 100-yard game. He had a 64-yard carry against Tampa. He still didn't crack 100 yards in that game. So he hadn't had a 100-yard performance in Washington yet. That all would change in that Chicago game. He had 103 yards at halftime, right? I remember him just destroying that Bears. He was all the offense we had. I think he had like 30 some odd carries, like 35 carries that game. And so he ran for like 140 or 50 or 60 yards or whatever it was. Brunell stunk. Oh my God, he was terrible. He threw a pick in that game that almost gave the Bears. He got the Bears back in the game. The Bears had nothing on offense. Our defense was smothering them. But Sean had a sack in that game. I remember he got a sack from all the way from the backside, yanked the quarterback down by his horse collar, and then did like a little pump dance. And then he had the game-clinching pick where he leaps up in the air and stretches his frame as high as it could go, snatches the ball down. And I remember yelling, Sean, get down. The game's over. Get down. Like, the last thing we need is you to fumble and give the Bears back. Because that's the kind of shit that would happen to us in those days. Get down. Sean wants a touchdown. You know he's a beast. When he touches a rock, he thinks he's a return man because he was a offensive player in high school. So he touched the rock. He thinks he's going to score. So he's dipping and dodging and racing inside. And I'm like, oh, he might score. He didn't score, but that was the end of the game. 13-10, preserved the victory. It felt good, and it was his coming out party. So then, the struggles continue, right? You lose a couple more games, but then you get the Cincinnati Bengals, who they're on the rise, right? This is a team, they're on the cusp. They're coming. Carson Palmer just got there the year before. He's establishing himself now. Chad Johnson is coming into his own. Now he's starting to rip the league up. So they're forming this really juggernaut offense. And we shut them down. And Sean had this ridiculous pick on Chad Johnson on the sidelines. I will never forget it. And it was just showing off his athleticism at a ridiculous rate. And he got in to Chad Johnson down the sideline, and Carson Palmer thought he had Chad for about an 80-yard touchdown. And Sean comes out of nowhere, leaps in the air, and the defender was there, and he might have picked it off. Sean jumped over everybody, goes up, takes it, gets his feet down in bounds before he goes out of bounds. It's a gorgeous pick, and it's just another example of this dude is different, man. He's not like anything we've ever seen before. So we lose that game because, again, the offense stinks. What happens, we were down 17-0, and Gibbs finally has had it with Brunell's ineptness, and he benches him, puts P-Ram in the game, and P-Ram takes us on a couple of scoring drives, but, he also turns it over twice, right? Typical P-Ram shit, and we lose the game 17-10. And so you're disappointed, but at least they made the switch at quarterback because Brunell was so bad, right? And again, it could have just been he was injured and all of this and that, but Brunell was horrid. So they go to P-Ram, and you look up, and the season's pretty much done at this point. We're probably 3-8 at this point of the season. Like, the season's done. Now you're just looking to see, all right, are these guys going to fight? Are they going to quit on Joe? Like, what are we going to do here? And they finish up the season, winning 3 out of their final 5 games. I remember the Giants one in particular because it was the biggest ass whooping that we doled out the entire season. We beat them 31-7. It was the first time all season we had scored more than 21 points. Let that sink in. It's week 13, and we haven't scored more than 21 points the entire season. Like, you gotta be kidding me, right? So, as crazy as that sounds, Clinton had a dominant game. Patrick Ramsey was extremely efficient. He didn't turn it over. We gave up a kickoff return for a touchdown. That's the only points the Giants scored in that game. Like I told you, our defense was dominant that year. It was the best defense that we've had during the entire Snyder era. Like I said, everyone wants to romanticize about 05. 04's defense was better because it had Antonio Pierce on it. It had Fred Smoot on it. Those guys were gone the following year. So, anyway, I digress. So you win that game, and the next week, this was like, I don't want to call it a measuring stick game because we weren't any good, right? You're 4-8 or whatever at this point of the season. So I don't want to call it a measuring stick game, but we had the Eagles. They're the best team in football, at least in the NFC. They went to the Super Bowl that year, if you recall. So, I mean, they're killing everybody. They had already smoked us earlier in the season. And so they're coming to FedEx, and I'm thinking, and it's a Sunday night game, and so I'm thinking they're probably going to beat the brakes off of us. But I want to see where we're at, right? We just did what we did to the Giants, highest output of the season. Let's see what we can do, and can we follow that up for an encore? What are we going to do? And we hung tough with those bastards, and we should have beat them. And we had our opportunities, just like we always do. We had our opportunities. You get into that game late. We had an opportunity to get a field goal on a possession, and it's 3rd and 1, and Clinton gets stopped. Joe, you kind of bitched up on us here, and he punted the ball on some Rivera shit, but our field goal kicking situation was horrid. So I don't blame him for that. And after getting stopped from 3rd and 1, I would have loved to have seen him go bootleg or something. The Eagles sold out for the run, and they guessed right. I mean, and they stopped us. Joe punted. And our punter wasn't, all that great. He kicked it into the end zone, so it really didn't net us anything. But the defense, as it typically did, got us a stop, got us the ball back, and we moved it right down the field again. And Patrick Ramsey throws, just makes just a poor decision, just stupid. Throws it into like triple coverage to Chris Cooley, and it gets picked off by Brian Dawkins. And that was the end of the game, really, at that point. And so we lose 21-18, I think, or I think, no, that was the Cowboys score. I think that was 17-14, I think. It was 3 points, whatever, because we were already in field goal range, and Ramsey just threw it up for grabs. On 1st down, no less, right? So that was really disappointing, but that was Patrick Ramsey. And I looked at Joe after Ramsey threw that pick. They panned to Joe. And I felt like that was the moment Joe was like, we got to get a quarterback. Like, we can't keep doing this shit, right? So you finish up the season. You beat – so the Minnesota game, Week 17, final game of the season, Vikings need it for, playoff purposes. If they win, they're in. They lose, they're gonna need help to get in. And so I just remember us playing inspired ball against – the Vikings, who was high-powered offensively all season long. Dante Culpepper set all kinds of NFL records at the time. He threw for over 4,700 yards that year, a bunch of touchdowns, like 30-some-odd touchdowns. He ran for another, 400 or 500 yards. He had over, like, 5,000 yards total offense, which was an NFL record at the time. Randy Moss was killing people. Nate Burleson was coming up in the game. They had talent in Minnesota. They could score, and we shut them down. And I remember there was this jump ball opportunity to Randy Moss early in the game. Him and Sean Taylor one-on-one. This is when my dad finally was like, yo, you got a real one over there, right? Sean Taylor, dudes weren't jumping with Randy Moss in these days. Dudes weren't staying, toe-to-toe with Randy Moss, step for step. And Sean is singled up with him. They're playing cover 2 over the top. And Randy gets loose, and it's just him and Sean. And Sean's right there with him, jumps to the apex and knocks the ball, almost picked it off, right? And, it just showed that our dude wasn't to be tampered or trifled with, right? So we ended up holding on for the victory. We really dominated them in that game. And Randy Moss walks off before the game's over. There's probably like 8 seconds left or whatever in the game. And Randy Moss just says, to hell with it, I'm done. And he walks off the field, and that's the big story. But I remember saying, man, we finished up this season playing confident football. They did not quit on Joe, which I never thought they would. And they showed resiliency. They showed fight. And I was so excited about what the next year would potentially bring. I didn't expect Joe to win in year 1 because, as I mentioned, we weren't very talented. They had to come in here and kind of overhaul the roster. So I was expecting, and we still didn't have a quarterback either. So that doesn't do you any favors. So I wasn't expecting this year 1 transformation, but what I saw was fight towards the end of that season. What I saw was Joe, figuring some things out. And, Greg Williams had this defense buzzing. When I tell you, if nothing else, if we weren't going to score, if we weren't going to be a credible offense, you weren't going to do shit on defense. You weren't going to do shit on offense against our defense. So I was feeling really good about, the upcoming season. And the 2005 season was a lot of fun. It as always, watching, it's never linear, right? You're all over the place. It's, you know, a 2-game win streak here. It's 5 losses here. You win 1, you lose 3 more, but then you go on these crazy, right? You know, that's what we do. And that's what 05 was all about. Boy, was it fun, though, man. And 05 felt like the beginning of us going back to the glory years. So that's where I'm going to leave you. 04 left on a high note. But the offseason of 04 left a bitter taste in your mouth as you go into the offseason of 05, rather. Some of the decisions that were made going into the 05 season left a little bit of a bitter taste in your mouth. Not like 06 would, right? But 05 felt like, yeah, I wouldn't have done that. I wouldn't have done that either. But we were able to overcome those things, and Joe was really settling in, all right? And that's where I'm going to leave you. 05 is a fun year. Can't wait to talk about it. But Joe's back. We're saved. The Messiah is here. We're going to see where it takes us in chapter number 7. So that's going to do it for me, your man Louie T, here on this continued series, The Reign of Terror, chronicling the 23 years of pure hell that Daniel Snyder has put this fan base through. Until next time, you guys have a good one. Take care.
LouieTeeNetwork.